Lisa Genis is an outdoor enthusiast who has worked for many years to help sustain the environment. Some of her main interests are native plants, prairies, and our water quality. Reduce, reuse, recycle are words she likes to live by. She has been a master recycler and composter since 2013, and her own backyard compost system has been perking away since 1993.
How many of you are currently attempting or have working backyard composts? Good, that's good. Okay, so backyard composting. It's a great way to turn your waste into a valuable resource. And so why should we compost? Well, the most obvious thing is, first of all, you can reduce your garbage by about 25% or more. Less garbage equals less money spent on both collection and disposal of the garbage. And compost is an inexpensive soil amendment that you can add to your garden, lawn, trees, shrubs, and your houseplants. It's fairly easy to compost. Getting started, you need a container, stuff to put in the container, and you need to manage the container. This is the requirements for compost bins from the St. Louis Park City Ordinance. They require your compost be in a structure that is fully enclosed with both tops, both on the top and the sides, and the structure must not exceed a total of 150 cubic feet, which is actually quite a bit. The compost bin size that I generally recommend for people is roughly 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, which is 27 cubic feet. And even if you have, 2 or 3 of those bins in your backyard, you're still not exceeding the city limit. It does say that wire structures, metal fencing, and other open mesh materials shall not be used. There's a little bit of a caveat to that, and I'll get to that when I talk about the structures. So, your container. It should be made from either plastic, wood, and the wood should be rot resistant, not chemically treated wood. Cedar is generally a really good choice for that. You can use concrete block. It's a little awkward, a little heavy, a little hard to move them around, but I have seen people at the community garden sites have made them out of concrete block or wire, which is specifically when we talk about wire, talking about hardware cloth. And again, the little note there is that St. Louis Park requires that all compost bins be fully enclosed and that the wire must be covered. So what I did with my bins, I have hardware cloth and cedar framed bins. I have additional cedar slats that are just kind of screwed in on the outside of the bin it basically looks like more like a box. And my lid, I have a hardware cloth lid that also has the slats on it as well, and that was acceptable to the city. The top and bottom of the bin should be open to let water run in and out. So in other words, you should put your bin directly on the soil, and the top that you have for it should be at least perforated to allow rain in particular to be able to get into the bin. And the opening from which you retrieve the compost should be large enough that you can access it with a spade or a garden fork. Most of them are at the bottom. If you've seen the plastic bins that are commercially available, the opening is at the bottom. And some of them I think are a little small. I like bins that have an opening on the front where it can be totally open. So you can enclose it, but then the front can be totally taken out because it makes it a lot easier to turn and also to get the finished compost out. And again, St. Louis Park requires a lid on all compost bins. Are all of you St. Louis Park City residents? Okay.
Does the city come out and see what you have?
No, they don't come out and inspect. And quite honestly, it's one of those situations where unless someone complains about it, you're probably, not going to have an issue. So I'm just making sure that I let you know what the city actually requires. And part of the reason I was a little late is I was talking to the gal from the Hennepin County Compost, the commercial compost site, and she said that the the PCA just recently changed some of the requirements for about backyard composting. So some of this may be changing in the next year or so, depending on what the city, what the changes were compared to what the city currently requires. So where are you going to put this bin? You should put the bin directly on soil, not on an impervious surface like asphalt or concrete, because you do want that to, you're not going to get good drainage if you have a bin sitting on a hard surface. And it should be conveniently located, because you need to be able to access it, particularly if you're going to be composting your kitchen scraps. It's got to be someplace where you're going to be willing to walk out the door and throw them in the bin. And it should be in a spot that gets rain, some sun, but is protected from wind if possible. That's just to help keep it from drying out too fast. So there's basically two kinds of composting, batch composting versus continuous composting. The tumbler style bins, have any of you seen the tumbler style bins? Those are a little smaller, and they're generally designed to compost a specific amount at a time. So you don't generally keep adding to those. It's more like you put everything that you need to put in for a batch in, you turn it, you turn it, you turn it, you make sure that it's properly moistened, and after a certain amount of time, you got your compost, take it out and start over again. For continuous composting, bin structures are best for that, the ones that you actually place on the ground. 2 to 3 bins are ideal, and that's mostly because turning is easier with multiple bins. You don't need compost starter, and any bin that you have should be sturdy and have slits or spaces on the sides for air circulation. So you can buy your compost bin, or you can build it if you're handy. They're available for purchase at a number of places, including the Hennepin County Drop-Off Facility in Brooklyn Park, home and garden centers, through municipal sales, like St. Louis Park just recently had one, or is having one. I think they're getting delivered next week. And then they're available online or from a local builder. There is a guy in Minneapolis who makes compost bins for sale. Or you can build your own. Many websites have detailed plans for them. So the best bin size is roughly 3 by 3 by 3 feet. You can do them up to 5 by 5 by 5 feet, but that gets a little cumbersome for turning and just generally a lot harder to work with. Bins smaller than 3 by 3 by 3 limit the amount of material that you can work with at a time, much like the tumbler bins. Most of the tumblers that are available are very modest size. I've only seen one tumbler that I think was roughly the size of a 3 by 3 by 3 foot container. And larger bins are a little bit too difficult to manage. I'm sure we've all seen the compost areas at a lot of the community gardens where they've built those 3 bins that are open on the side, and they're huge, and that's a little awkward for backyard composters to be able to manage, particularly if you don't have any power equipment and you're working with a spade or a shovel. So, and here's a couple of online resources. The first one, Steve's Earth Engines. He's the gentleman in Minneapolis that builds them locally. And the 2 other websites here have a number of different plans using a variety of different materials on how to do those. This is what y'all came for, right? Know what to put in here. So there are 4 basic ingredients for good compost. You need your carbon, your nitrogen, oxygen, and moisture. So composting is basically the growing of microbes. The microbes use the carbon to make energy and the nitrogen to make proteins. The oxygen and moisture are kind of the auxiliary support team. They're important for the health of the microbes. So here's a simple formula for what you need to put in there. You've got 3 parts of carbon, which are your brown materials, and 1 part of nitrogen, which are your green materials. And then enough moisture so that the material in your bin is roughly the consistency of a wrung out sponge. So you don't want it sopping wet, but you don't want it bone dry either. And then oxygen, which you can provide by using some materials that allow airflow within the bin. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And voila, you get compost. It's kind of magic. So here's a list of some basic things of what you can put in there. And these, I've got kitchen greens, kitchen browns, yard greens, and yard browns. And I think most of this is pretty, you probably have seen this before. So fruit and vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, tea bags, eggshells, rice and pasta, and houseplant cuttings. Kitchen browns, coffee filters, you can put stale bread in, paper napkins and towels, paper cups, dryer lint, egg cartons, just the paper or cardboard ones, food soiled paper, food freezer boxes that many of those are not recyclable because they're of a material that is too short of fiber for good for recycling. And I know it sounds a little weird, but hair. I actually had a dog who was a very furry dog, and it was nice that we were able to compost her hair because it was a lot. The thing about paper and the cardboard egg cartons, I like to tell people that the smaller your pieces are in your compost, the faster it's going to go. So if you're going to compost napkins and paper cups and egg cartons, you want to make sure to tear those into smaller pieces or shred them. I put everything that I can through a paper shredder. I've managed to flatten paper cups, put them through the shredder, everything, so that you've got smaller pieces, because that's going to break down faster than if you just try to throw the paper cup in there.
Is that brown or green?
Those are browns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Newspaper.
Newspaper, you can, you know what, I didn't put that down because we usually recycle newspaper, but you can put it in your compost.
Better to recycle or stick it in your compost?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on your particular need. If you have more of a need for compost, then by all means, compost your newspaper. And again, I would definitely shred it. And newspaper is good for a lot of things. A lot of people use it when they plant. Instead of putting down landscaping fabric, a lot of people put newspaper down and then mulch over it and then plant through that. I mean, it's a really useful material.
What about like organic products? Like I had a futon that I actually recycled, but all the cotton in the middle, and Gail told me that all the cotton that was actually the killing of the futon, and then using it to recycle. Have you heard of that in your compost?
Yeah, if it's a natural fiber, you can compost it. So cotton and wool, yes. Synthetic stuff doesn't really break down very much. And you may find too, if you get fruit or vegetables that have little plastic labels on them, you're going to find those in your compost at the end. So if you want to take them off before you throw them in there, or if you want, wait until the end and you can kind of strain them out, at the end. But I usually take mine off before, when I get them. So yard greens and browns. Flowers, vegetables, plant trimmings, hedge clippings, small amounts of grass. Grass is really, really hot. It's very high in nitrogen. So I generally discourage people from putting in too much grass as a main green, but small amounts are okay. You can put in weeds, and again, I have a little caveat about weeds. I don't personally put any weeds in my compost at my backyard compost, just because it's very difficult to get to the proper temperature in a backyard compost bin to destroy weed seeds and plant pathogens. And if you are going to indeed be using your compost on your other greenery around your yard, you don't want to be spreading stuff around. So unless you're 100% certain you're getting to that 130 to 150 degree temperature for 3 solid days, I would recommend not putting in weeds. And then we have yard browns, which are basically leaves, straw and hay, small twigs, dried grass, and if you are using weeds, make sure they're weeds without seeds. And that's the other thing. It's hard to find weeds without seeds because half of the time we don't know they're weeds until they've already flowered. So, okay. So oxygen, really important for your compost. You need to turn your compost regularly, and layering in dried leaves or other kind of airy material like straw or hay creates air spaces which provide the oxygen. So what I generally like to do is I start out with layers of dried leaves, and then as I'm adding in my green stuff, I do smaller layers of green stuff and then bigger layers of leaves. I keep a huge pile of dried leaves by my compost bin all year round. So I have dried leaves that I just kind of keep around all the time. That it's amazing how, it's a 3-to-1 ratio of browns to greens. So you want to make sure that you're adding, most of what we add in during the growing season is greens. We're adding in our vegetables and our kitchen scraps, and we're adding in, plants and stuff from the garden, but we want to make sure that you keep adding in the browns as well as you're adding in the greens. And moisture. So rain is the best source if we get enough rain. If it's dry, go ahead and haul your hose over there and water it down. As I think I mentioned before, it should be the consistency of a wet, wrung out sponge for the best action.
How regularly, or how often is regularly churning?
Yeah, I'll talk about that too. It's that's kind of a personal preference too. There are recommendations, but I understand everybody's got lives too. You're not a slave to your compost. So here's a list of things that you should not put in your backyard compost. So meat, fish, bones, raw eggs. Eggshells are okay, but not raw eggs. Oils and fats, sauces, ashes, pet waste or manure, diseased plants, mature weeds, charcoal ash, large pieces of wood, or pressure-treated wood. So there are some things that are on this list that are actually compostable, but not in your backyard compost bin. So like most of the things that are on the left-hand side there, that if you have the organics pickup from the city, those you can compost, because the commercial composting sites get to much higher temperatures and they're able to actually break down those kind of materials.
Are either of the ashes, the charcoal ash and the ashes from the fireplace and stuff, so will the city take that for compost or not?
That's actually a question I haven't asked them about. Because you're talking like maybe ash from your fireplace.
Right, and then also we have a charcoal grill.
Charcoal grill as well.
Cleaning it out, putting it in a bag, and then I never know which one just throw in the garbage or does it go in the compost?
I'll check on that and see it, because I'm pretty sure that's acceptable at the compost site. So, management. About a cubic yard is required to generate the proper temperature, which is 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. You need 3 days at that temperature to kill bad stuff, which is basically weed seeds and plant pathogens. But it is, just so you know, it is hard for home composters to get consistently to that temperature. So again, I don't recommend putting in weeds or diseased plants. So an active pile has microbes that are actively converting organic material to compost. If it's too wet, too dry, or too compacted, the microbes won't work and you've got a passive pile. And if it's too wet, it's going to lead to anaerobic conditions, which is what a lot of people refer to as their rotting pile, because it smells bad. A working active compost pile, it doesn't smell bad. It actually doesn't smell like a whole lot. Adding more carbon material and or turning the pile to increase the oxygen can help combat the anaerobic conditions. And if it's too dry, you just need to water it. And regularly turning your pile with a garden fork is great for air circulation. I am kind of a lazy composter. I fully admit to it. I don't turn my pile every week. I maybe turn it, I'm going to guess maybe every other week, and my compost works just fine. I regularly add in browns. So what I do a lot is I add in a couple of feet of leaves on the top and kind of bury my kitchen scraps in the leaves. So I'm constantly kind of mixing it up as I bury stuff into it. If you're really energetic and you're willing to, I would recommend turning your compost every week. And that's why I generally recommend a multiple bin system, because that does make it a lot easier. You can turn it into one bin, and then, you know, if you need to, mix in leaves and dry material and turn it back into the other bin. Again, and layering your material can make a difference too. So 6 inches of brown material on the bottom, particularly twigs or corn stalks, to help kind of keep it from getting too compacted at the bottom. And then alternating brown and green materials. And if you have garden soil, like used garden soil from your old pots, you can throw that into in a layer. That'll help speed up the process a little bit. And again, smaller pieces break down faster. Can I just, one quick word about winter composting? You can compost during the winter. It doesn't actively work during the winter, but you can continue to add to your pile. What I generally do is at the, last time I turn it in the fall, I leave about 2 feet of leaves on the top and just bury the compost in it as you go along during the winter. So I do. I have a cover on mine because St. Louis Park requires that. Yeah. And I also live in an area, I live very close to the trail. We have a lot of deer and raccoons and other critters too, and it just kind of helps keep it down that. And how do you know when it's done? Because when it looks like compost, when you can't recognize any of the ingredients anymore, and it should smell earthy. Now, you still want to wait for a couple of months before you actually use that compost. You want to store it and let it finish curing, because if you put it on your plants when it's that hot, it's going to burn your plants. And so you want to kind of let it kind of settle down for a few months. And then there's some options. I mean, I have information down at the table about vermiculture. If you don't have the backyard space for it, or you live in an apartment but you still want to compost, you can use worms. And there's also the curbside organics pickup that's offered by the city. I think that's it. And I have a couple of other resources. So, do you have any questions? Yeah.
How do you judge? You said we've found roughly a 3-to-1 ratio of browns to greens. How do you judge that? By just sort of by volume, how it looks?
Yes, and so if you've got a square or round bin, I do it just by, I kind of do it by the hand method, So like, if you figure that you've got a layer, 1 hand's worth of greens, then 3 hands worth of browns. I don't like measure or anything like that, and it's a rough approximation. It's always better. I've found this to be true. It's always better to have more browns in there than you think you need. Because it just, and part of it is because a lot of the browns that we use are dried, whereas a lot of the green stuff is wet, so it's more dense as opposed to the browns, which tend to be kind of light and fluffy. Yeah.
Our compost gets hot, then it's cold for a really long time, and then it's hot. So
Yeah. Are you adding stuff at a continuous rate? It might be the turning.
We bring in the kitchen scraps and then
Don't
we
look
throw
at me
some
when you
brown.
say
Yeah. If that's true, you might want to try turning it a little more often.
Maybe a little wetter than we have.
Well, and that's possible too, because too wet is, I think, the biggest.
Ours is not too wet, it's probably too dry.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Great. Get the garden hose out. Give it a little water. Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
Great.
And
Thanks.
she's downstairs at the table if
Yeah.
you have more questions.
Yeah.